The fluorescent lights of Grand Foods hummed a monotonous tune, a stark contrast to the thumping bass of the exclusive Manhattan clubs Thomas McCown frequented. He was supposed to be at a charity gala, rubbing shoulders with the city's elite, but a sudden craving for artisanal olive oil had detoured him to this mundane supermarket. As he browsed the gourmet aisle, a familiar laugh, light and musical, drifted from the checkout lanes. It was a laugh he hadn't heard in 6 months, a laugh that once filled his sprawling penthouse with joy, now echoing in the sterile air of aisle 5. His heart, usually a steady drumbeat of ambition, hitched. He looked up, and his world, meticulously constructed on a foundation of wealth and carefully guarded secrets, began to fracture. There, swiping groceries with practiced ease, was Amelia, his wife, and she was undeniably pregnant. Thomas McCown, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation and aggressive takeovers in the tech world, felt a cold dread seep into his bones. His initial thought was that it was a cruel mirage, a trick of his mind, but the soft curve of her belly, visible even beneath the loose-fitting Grand Foods uniform, was undeniably real. And then his gaze shifted slightly to the side. Standing just behind Amelia's register, pretending to examine a display of chewing gum, was Sarah, his assistant, and his current mistress. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were wide with a mix of shock and something Thomas couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps a flicker of triumph? A wave of nausea washed over Thomas. He clutched a bottle of exorbitant truffle oil, the glass cold against his clammy palm. Amelia. Pregnant. Working as a cashier. The sheer absurdity of it was like a punch to the gut. Their divorce had been messy, a protracted battle fought through high-powered lawyers and veiled threats. He had believed it was finalized, the papers signed and sealed, the chapter closed. He had moved on, or so he thought, into the arms of the ambitious Sarah, who offered a sleek, uncomplicated companionship that suited his busy life. He remembered the last conversation he'd had with Amelia, 6 months ago. It had been an explosion of accusations and recriminations in their penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Thomas had been furious about her persistent questions regarding his late nights and vague business trips. He'd thrown his accusations of her growing distance, her perceived lack of understanding for his demanding career. The argument culminated in his declaration that he wanted out, that he couldn't live like this anymore. Amelia, her face pale but resolute, had simply said, "Fine, Thomas. If that's what you truly want, then so be it." He hadn't seen her since, save for the impersonal exchanges between their legal teams. He'd assumed she'd gone back to her parents in Vermont, as she often threatened during their fights. He'd sent a generous settlement, more than enough to set her up comfortably. Or so he believed. Now seeing her here, a cashier in a brightly lit supermarket, pregnant, shattered every one of his assumptions. It wasn't just the betrayal of her silence about the pregnancy, it was the stark reality of her situation. Amelia, who had once graced magazine covers by his side, who had curated art collections and hosted elegant dinner parties, was now scanning groceries. The image of her, vibrant and full of life, entertaining foreign dignitaries in their opulent living room, clashed violently with the mundane reality before him. The discrepancy was too vast, too painful to reconcile. He watched her, transfixed. Her movements were fluid, efficient, almost graceful, despite the visible discomfort of her pregnancy. She smiled at a customer, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes, eyes that had once sparkled with adoration for him. A pang of something akin to regret, sharp and unexpected, pierced through his carefully constructed armor. He had dismissed her as a pampered socialite, dependent on his wealth, but here she was, undeniably self-sufficient, albeit in the most unexpected and humiliating way imaginable. Sarah, sensing his sudden paralysis, subtly moved closer, her hand lightly grazing his arm. "Thomas, are you all right?" she whispered, her voice laced with an artificial concern that grated on his nerves. He shrugged her off, his gaze still fixed on Amelia. Sarah's eyes followed his, and a flicker of something unreadable crossed her features before settling into a mask of placid indifference. Thomas felt a surge of irrational anger. Anger at Amelia for keeping this from him, anger at himself for being so blind, and a simmering, dangerous anger at Sarah, who was clearly aware of this situation and had kept it a secret. How long had she known? How many times had she driven past this very supermarket, seen Amelia, and said nothing? The thought churned in his stomach, sour and bitter. The carefully curated image of his life, of his effortless control, was crumbling, and the architect of its destruction was not a business rival or a market crash, but a woman he had discarded, now carrying his child. The fluorescent lights of Grand Foods seemed to grow brighter, hotter, illuminating the uncomfortable truths he had meticulously buried. Thomas felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He knew he couldn't confront Amelia here, not in front of Sarah, not in front of a dozen unsuspecting shoppers. The scene would be a disaster, a public spectacle that would inevitably find its way into the tabloids. His reputation, so carefully cultivated, would be in tatters. He had to be strategic. He had to understand. He pulled Sarah away from the checkout lanes, his grip on her arm surprisingly firm. "We need to go," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Sarah, ever the poised professional, managed a tight, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, Thomas. Is everything all right?" Her eyes, however, betrayed a deeper knowledge, a knowing glint that confirmed his burgeoning suspicions. Once they were safely in the tinted privacy of his luxury SUV, Thomas turned to her, his voice low and dangerous. "You knew, didn't you?" Sarah met his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. "Knew what, Thomas?" "Don't play coy with me, Sarah. Amelia, pregnant, working at a supermarket. You saw her, didn't you? You knew." His voice rose, betraying the raw anger simmering beneath his controlled exterior. Sarah sighed, a theatrical gesture that only fueled his rage. "Thomas, please, keep your voice down. We're in public." She paused, then continued, her voice soft, almost regretful. "Yes, Thomas. I saw her. A few weeks ago, actually. I was running an errand." "And you didn't think to tell me?" he demanded, his jaw clenched. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the bustling New York street outside. "What would have been the point, Thomas? You and Amelia are divorced. It's not my place, not your place," he scoffed. "She's pregnant with my child, Sarah, and she's working as a cashier. Do you have any idea how that looks? How it makes me look?" The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, revealing the true core of his concern, his image, his carefully constructed persona. Sarah finally turned back to him, her eyes wide, feigning shock. "Your child? Thomas, are you sure? The divorce was finalized months ago. Are you certain it's yours?" The question hung in the air, a venomous insinuation designed to sow doubt. Thomas stared at her, a cold realization dawning on him. The way she had so readily suggested it wasn't his, the almost eager tone in her voice, it was too carefully crafted. "What are you implying, Sarah?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. She shrugged, a small dismissive gesture. "Only that. Well, people move on, Thomas. Amelia is a beautiful woman. It wouldn't be surprising if she found someone else." The insinuation stung, not because he believed it, but because it exposed Sarah's true colors. She wasn't just his mistress. She was a calculated opportunist, willing to twist truths to maintain her position. He remembered the subtle ways she had always undermined Amelia, the casual remarks about her perceived weaknesses, her frivolous interests, her lack of understanding for his vision. He had dismissed them as harmless, the petty jealousies of a woman vying for his attention. Now they took on a darker, more sinister meaning. "Get out," he said, his voice flat. Sarah blinked, clearly taken aback. "Thomas," I said, "get out, Sarah, now." He pointed to the curb. Her carefully constructed composure finally cracked. "Thomas, what is this? After everything we've been through, I'm just trying to help you." "You helped yourself, Sarah. You watched my wife, pregnant with my child, struggle, and you said nothing. Worse, you tried to poison my mind. Get out." He opened the car door, his gaze unyielding. Reluctantly, with a final, withering glare, Sarah exited the SUV. As she slammed the door shut, Thomas felt a strange mix of relief and a deeper, more unsettling despair. He had pushed away the woman who, for months, had been his confidant, his lover, his escape. But in doing so, he had stripped away another layer of the carefully constructed lies he had been living. He drove aimlessly through the city, the vibrant lights of Times Square blurring into an incoherent streak. His mind raced, replaying every interaction with Amelia, every argument, every moment of perceived distance. He had been so consumed by his ambition, by the relentless pursuit of more, that he had become blind to the woman who loved him, the woman he had promised to cherish. He pulled over near a deserted park, the Manhattan skyline glittering coldly in the distance. He remembered Amelia's quiet strength, her unwavering integrity. He had always seen her as fragile, a delicate flower needing his protection, his wealth. But her presence at the supermarket, her quiet determination, belied that image. She was a survivor, and she was doing it without him. The question of why gnawed at him. Why was she working? He had given her a substantial settlement, more than enough for her to live comfortably for years. Had she refused it? Had his lawyers somehow botched the paperwork? Or was there something else, something deeper, that he was missing? He pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over the contact for his lawyer. No, not yet. He needed to talk to Amelia first. He needed to understand. The first step, however, was finding her. He knew she wouldn't be at their old apartment, and she hadn't gone to Vermont. She was here, in this city, living a life he couldn't fathom, a life he had unwittingly forced upon her. He felt a chilling sense of foreboding. The collapse of his world was just beginning. Thomas spent the next few days in a haze of restless energy and gnawing guilt. He couldn't focus on work, couldn't shake the image of Amelia at the checkout. He had his private investigator, a discreet but highly effective man named Leo, discreetly track her down. It took Leo less than 24 hours to find her, confirming that she was indeed living in a modest but clean apartment in a quiet residential neighborhood in Queens, a far cry from their opulent Manhattan penthouse. Armed with her address, Thomas drove to Queens, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and determination. He found the building, a red brick structure with a small, well-tended garden out front. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beat of his pulse. He was Thomas McCone, a man who commanded respect, who orchestrated multi-million-dollar deals. Yet, approaching this modest apartment door, he felt like a nervous teenager. He knocked, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. After a moment, the door creaked open. Amelia stood there, her eyes widening in surprise as she saw him. The pregnancy was more pronounced now, her belly a gentle curve beneath a comfortable maternity dress. Her hair, usually styled immaculately, was tied back in a simple ponytail, and there were faint shadows beneath her eyes. Yet, even with the fatigue, her inherent grace and quiet dignity shone through. "Thomas," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "What are you doing here?" "Amelia, we need to talk," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. She sighed, a weary sound. "I don't think we have anything to talk about." She started to close the door, but Thomas quickly placed his hand on the frame, preventing it. "Please, Amelia, just 5 minutes. I saw you at Grand Foods." Her eyes hardened. "So, you finally decided to grace the working class with your presence, Thomas? What, did you run out of caviar?" Her sarcasm was a thin shield, but it stung. "Amelia, I didn't know," he pleaded, pushing past her gently into the small but tastefully decorated living room. The apartment was simple, a far cry from their previous lavish lifestyle. But it had a warmth, a personal touch that their penthouse had always lacked. He noticed a small, intricately carved wooden cradle in the corner, a stark reminder of the life they had created. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, a protective gesture. "Didn't know what, Thomas? That I'm pregnant? That I'm working?" Which part exactly alludes the great Thomas McCown? "Both. Everything. I thought you went to Vermont. I thought the divorce was final. I sent a settlement, a very generous one, by the way. What happened to it?" The questions tumbled out, urgent and demanding. Amelia's eyes flashed with anger. "The settlement? Thomas, your lawyers, in their infinite wisdom, managed to tie up every single asset. They froze my accounts, citing disputed claims and financial irregularities that magically appeared after I refused to sign a confidentiality agreement that would have effectively silenced me about everything." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the raw hurt beneath her anger. Thomas stared at her, dumbfounded. "What? That's impossible. I specifically instructed my lawyers to ensure your financial security. I wanted to be fair." "Fair?" she scoffed. "Fair, Thomas, is not having your entire life savings locked away by a predatory legal team simply because you refuse to be bought and silenced. Fair is not being forced to take a job because you literally have no access to your own money." She gestured around the small apartment. "This, Thomas, is what fair looks like when you're dealing with the Thorn Empire." A cold knot formed in Thomas's stomach. His lawyers. He had given them carte blanche, instructed them to handle it efficiently, to protect his interests. He had been so consumed by his desire to move on, to erase Amelia from his life, that he hadn't scrutinized the details. He had implicitly trusted his legal team to execute his wishes, not to actively sabotage Amelia. But now, connecting the dots, he saw the chilling truth. His legal team, accustomed to his ruthless business tactics, had likely interpreted "protect his interests" as "destroy the opposition." "I swear, Amelia, I had no idea," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I would never have wanted you to go through this." She looked at him, her eyes searching his, trying to discern the truth. "No? Then tell me, Thomas, why did you have your lawyers draw up a prenuptial agreement that, in the event of a divorce, would have left me with practically nothing if I left you? And why did you then accuse me of financial mismanagement when I refused to sign it?" Thomas flinched. The prenup. That had been a preemptive measure, something his business partners had insisted on, a standard procedure for a man of his wealth. He had presented it to Amelia casually, dismissing her concerns about its harsh terms. He had never truly believed they would use it, never believed their marriage would crumble. He had seen it as a formality, a legal safeguard. But now, in the harsh light of their reality. It was a weapon. I don't know, Amelia. It was standard procedure, I thought. My advisors insisted. He knew it sounded weak, a pathetic excuse. Your advisors, she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Always your advisors, Thomas. Never you. Never your own conscience. She paused, her gaze fixed on him. And then, there's the other thing, isn't there, Thomas? The real reason I couldn't accept your generous settlement, even if I could access it. He braced himself, dreading what was to come. Amelia took a deep breath, her voice low and steady. Thomas, remember that charity gala 6 months ago? The one you were supposedly too busy to attend, claiming you had a crucial business meeting in Geneva. He remembered. It was the night he had spent with Sarah, celebrating a successful deal, a night he had dismissed Amelia's pleas to accompany her. I went, Thomas, she continued, her voice filled with a quiet pain. And I saw you there, with her, Sarah, in the private lounge, away from the main crowd. You were holding her hand. You were kissing her. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. He had been so careful, so discreet. He had orchestrated elaborate alibis, convinced himself that Amelia was too naive, too trusting to ever suspect. The weight of his deception, of his callous disregard for her feelings, crashed down on him. Amelia, He stamped, unable to form coherent words. Don't, Thomas, she said, holding up a hand. Don't insult me with more lies. The moment I saw you, the moment I saw the way you looked at her, I knew. It wasn't just a business trip. It was never just a business trip. And after that, after everything we had, after the promises, the vows, how could I accept your money? How could I allow myself to be bought off, to become another one of your convenient transactions? I had to leave, Thomas. I had to find my own way, on my own terms. For myself, and for our child. She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture of fierce protection. Thomas stood there, a millionaire stripped bare, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. The truth, in all its brutal honesty, was a suffocating weight. He had been so arrogant, so self-absorbed, so utterly blind. He had shattered the trust of the woman he loved, dismissed her pain, and then, through the ruthless machinations of his own legal team, effectively stripped her of her financial independence, forcing her into a life of struggle, all while she carried his child. He felt a profound, aching emptiness, a desperate longing for a past he had so carelessly discarded. The redemption he so desperately needed seemed an impossible mountain to climb. Thomas left Amelia's apartment that day a changed man. The encounter had been a brutal awakening, stripping away the layers of self-deception and arrogance he had accumulated over years of unchecked success. He drove back to Manhattan, the familiar cityscape now looking alien, his own reflection in the rearview mirror, a stranger. The man who had entered Amelia's apartment was a ruthless titan of industry. The man who emerged was a bewildered, broken individual, grappling with the wreckage of his own making. The first thing he did was fire his entire legal team. He stormed into their plush offices, his fury a palpable force. "You incompetent, unethical vultures!" he roared, slamming his fist on the senior partner's polished mahogany desk. "You not only sabotaged my divorce, you actively engaged in tactics that caused immense harm to my ex-wife, the mother of my child. You froze her assets. You manipulated the legal system, all under the guise of protecting my interests. You're fired, all of you. And I'm going to ensure your professional lives are as frozen as Amelia's bank accounts." The lawyers, usually unflappable, cowered under his unprecedented wrath. Thomas didn't care about their protests. their panicked explanations. He wanted them gone. He hired a new, ethical firm, one with a reputation for integrity, and instructed them to immediately unfreeze Amelia's accounts and ensure she received every penny she was entitled to, and then some. He also set up a substantial trust fund for their unborn child, completely independent of his own volatile finances. But money, he realized, wouldn't fix the gaping wound he had inflicted. He had betrayed Amelia's trust, humiliated her, and forced her into a life of hardship while he lived in lavish comfort. The guilt was a constant companion, a heavy cloak he couldn't shed. He tried to see Amelia again, to apologize, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but she refused his calls, ignored his texts, and when he went to her apartment, she wouldn't answer the door. He respected her boundaries, knowing he had no right to demand her time or attention. He understood that actions spoke louder than words, and his actions, until now, had been nothing short of reprehensible. He found solace, surprisingly, in the most unlikely of places: their old haunts. He visited the art galleries they used to frequent, standing before the paintings she adored, remembering her insightful observations. He walked through Central Park, recalling their quiet strolls, the way she would point out a particular bird or a blooming flower, finding beauty in the smallest details he had always overlooked. He even went to the small, independent bookstore where they had first met, remembering her infectious passion for literature. Each memory was a bittersweet pang, a reminder of what he had lost. One evening, he found himself sitting alone in his penthouse, the vast space feeling empty and cold. He looked out at the glittering city lights, the symbol of his success, and felt a profound loneliness. He picked up a photo of Amelia, taken years ago, her face radiant with happiness. He remembered the day it was taken, their honeymoon in Santorini. He had been so certain of their future then, so blind to the potential for his own destructive tendencies. He thought about the child, his child, growing inside her. A child he had almost unwittingly condemned to a life without a father, or at least a father who was present and loving. The thought ignited a fierce determination within him. He had to change, not for Amelia's forgiveness, not even for his own peace of mind, but for his child. He had to be a better man, a man worthy of the immense responsibility of fatherhood. He started by re-evaluating his entire life. He stepped back from some of his more aggressive business ventures, delegating more, creating a healthier work-life balance. He stopped chasing every deal, every acquisition, realizing that true wealth lay not in accumulating more, but in nurturing what truly mattered. He began volunteering at a local charity, anonymously, helping at a soup kitchen, experiencing a different side of life, a side far removed from the gilded cages of his own existence. He sent Amelia a letter, not a demanding one, but a heartfelt apology, pouring out his guilt, his regrets, and his newfound understanding. He didn't expect a response, and he didn't receive one. But writing it was a cathartic experience, a necessary step in his journey towards self-forgiveness. Months passed. The due date approached. Thomas was a nervous wreck, constantly checking his phone, hoping for news. He had asked Leo, his private investigator, to keep a discreet eye on Amelia. Not to intrude, but to simply inform him when she went into labor. He just wanted to know, to be there, even if it was from a distance. One morning, a call came from Leo. Amelia had been admitted to the hospital. Thomas's heart leaped into his throat. He drove to the hospital, his hands clammy on the steering wheel, a mix of terror and profound hope swirling within him. He walked into the waiting room, his billionaire status stripped away by the raw vulnerability of the moment. He saw Amelia's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, looking anxious but hopeful. Mrs. Hayes, a kind-faced woman who had always treated him with warmth, looked up and saw him. Her expression shifted from surprise to a hesitant welcome. "Thomas," she said, her voice soft. "What are you doing here?" I just wanted to be here, for Amelia, for the baby." His voice was shaky. Mr. Hayes, a stern but fair man, simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that Thomas's presence, however unexpected, was understood. Hours later, a doctor emerged, smiling. "Congratulations, everyone. It's a healthy baby girl." A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over Thomas, eclipsing all the pain and guilt of the past months. He was a father. He had a daughter, a new life, a new beginning. He saw Mrs. Hayes wipe away tears of joy and Mr. Hayes offer a rare, gentle smile. He felt an overwhelming urge to see his daughter, to see Amelia. He hesitated, then asked Mrs. Hayes, Can I see them?" She looked at him, then back at the delivery room door. "Amelia, she asked for you, Thomas." His heart pounded. Amelia had asked for him. After everything. It was a small flicker of hope, a fragile seed of redemption, but it was enough. He walked towards the door, his steps uncertain, but his heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The journey to redemption was long, arduous, and fraught with challenges, but for his daughter, for Amelia, he was finally ready to walk it. Thomas stood at the threshold of Amelia's hospital room, his breath catching in his throat. The room was softly lit, a serene oasis amidst the sterile hospital environment. Amelia lay in the bed, looking utterly exhausted but radiant, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger, no resentment, only a quiet weariness and a profound, maternal love. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice soft. He walked to the side of the bed, his gaze fixed on the tiny face nestled against her chest. Their daughter. She was so small, so perfect, a miniature version of both of them. He felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness, a love so fierce it almost buckled his knees. "She's beautiful, Amelia," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. Amelia offered a weak smile. "She is. Her name is Lily. Lily. A delicate, beautiful name." He reached out a hesitant finger, gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. Lily stirred, letting out a tiny, contented sigh. Thomas felt a tear trace a path down his cheek, a tear he didn't even realize he was shedding. "Amelia," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "I am so sorry. For everything. For the way I treated you. For my blindness. For allowing my lawyers to do what they did. For Sarah. For not being there for you. I know words aren't enough. But I truly am sorry." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "Thomas, I was so angry, so hurt. I felt so betrayed." "I know," he said, nodding. "And you had every right to be. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I hope, in time, you can find a way to let go of the anger. For Lily's sake, if not for mine." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, a deep sigh escaping her lips. "When I asked for you, it wasn't because I'd forgiven you, Thomas. It was because she's half you. And she deserves to know her father. A father who is present, who cares." His heart swelled with a fragile hope. "I will be, Amelia. I promise. I will be present. I will be a father to Lily, in every sense of the word. And I will do everything in my power to make amends to you. I've already fired my lawyers, unfrozen your accounts, and set up a trust fund for Lily. I'm taking a step back from work, focusing on what truly matters. I'm trying to be a different man, Amelia." She studied him, searching his eyes for sincerity. He held her gaze, offering her his raw, exposed vulnerability. "I see that," she finally said, her voice softer. "I see a difference, Thomas. And for Lily, I'm willing to try, to be civil, to co-parent." "Thank you, Amelia," he whispered, genuine gratitude washing over him. "Thank you for that." The following weeks were a delicate dance of cautious steps and tentative rebuilding. Thomas was a constant presence at the hospital, then at Amelia's apartment. He brought groceries, cooked meals, changed diapers, and read to Lily in a surprisingly gentle voice. He didn't push for anything more than shared parenthood, understanding that trust, once shattered, could only be painstakingly rebuilt, brick by painful brick. He saw the subtle shifts in Amelia's demeanor. The initial guardedness slowly gave way to moments of shared laughter over Lily's antics. He saw the way she looked at him when he gently soothed a crying Lily, a flicker of something he desperately hoped was not just gratitude, but perhaps a nascent spark of the old affection. One afternoon, as he was rocking Lily to sleep, Amelia sat beside him on the sofa, a comfortable silence settling between them. "Thomas," she said, her voice quiet, "I received the letter. Your apology." He looked at her, his heart in his throat. "And it meant a lot. To hear you acknowledge your mistakes, to hear you express genuine remorse." She paused, then continued, her gaze fixed on Lily's sleeping face. "I still have a lot of healing to do, Thomas. A lot of anger to process. But I'm willing to consider the possibility that you've truly changed. For Lily. And perhaps for us too." Thomas felt a surge of emotion, so profound it almost overwhelmed him. It wasn't a declaration of love, not a promise of instant reconciliation. It was a glimmer of hope, a fragile invitation to a future he had once believed was irretrievably lost. It was the first true seed of redemption, and he vowed with every fiber of his being that he would nurture it with unwavering dedication. The path ahead was long and uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles. But looking at Amelia, then at his sleeping daughter, Thomas knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was no longer the arrogant millionaire who had carelessly shattered his world. He was a father, a man on a journey of redemption, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt a genuine sense of purpose, a deep and abiding love that transcended all his previous ambitions. The story of Thomas McCown was no longer about power and wealth. It was about love, forgiveness, and the arduous, beautiful journey of becoming a truly good man. The weeks bled into months, each day a small, deliberate step in Thomas's journey of transformation. Amelia, while still cautious, allowed him more access to Lily, and, by extension, to her own life. He had moved into a temporary apartment in Queens, not far from her, a conscious decision to be fully present and accessible. The grand penthouse now felt like a relic of a past life, a gilded cage he no longer desired. He embraced fatherhood with an intensity that surprised even himself. He relished the early morning feedings, the countless diaper changes, the cooing sounds Lily made when he held her close. He read every parenting book he could find, devoured articles on child development, and sought advice from Amelia's parents, who, despite their initial reservations, were slowly starting to accept his renewed presence. The dynamic between Thomas and Amelia was slowly shifting from strained civility to a comfortable camaraderie. They discussed Lily's milestones, shared parenting challenges, and even found themselves laughing over silly baby anecdotes. There were still moments of tension, lingering shadows of past hurts, but they were fewer and farther between. Amelia, seeing his consistent effort, his genuine remorse, and his unwavering dedication to Lily, began to soften. One evening, after Lily was finally asleep, Thomas and Amelia were sitting in her living room, a rare moment of quiet. "Thomas," she began, her voice hesitant, "I wanted to thank you for everything. For being here, for being such a wonderful father to Lily." He looked at her, his heart swelling. "Amelia, I should be thanking you for allowing me back into your lives, for giving me this chance." She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes, eyes that he remembered so vividly from their early days. "It hasn't been easy, you know. But seeing you with her, seeing the change in you, it makes me believe that people can truly change." "I have changed, Amelia," he said, his voice earnest. "You and Lily have changed me. You've shown me what truly matters. All the wealth, all the power. It means nothing without love, without family." He paused, then took a deep breath. "Amelia, I know I've hurt you deeply, and I don't expect you to forget that. But I want to ask you something, if you'd even consider it." He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "I want to rebuild our lives, Amelia, not just as co-parents, but as a family. I want to marry you again, properly, with no prenups, no lawyers, just us. I want to earn your trust back every single day. I want to be the man you deserve, the husband I should have always been." Amelia's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then something else. Perhaps hope, perhaps fear. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "Thomas, that's a lot. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. So much has happened." "I know," he said gently. "And I'm not asking for an answer now. Just consider it. Consider the possibility. I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Because you, Amelia, and Lily, you're my world now. And I can't imagine a future without you both." She didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken emotions, with the weight of their past and the fragile promise of their future. Thomas braced himself for rejection, for her to tell him it was too much, too soon. But then she looked up, a soft smile gracing her lips, and a tear, unshed, glistened in her eye. "I'll think about it, Thomas," she whispered. "I'll think about it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was an opening, a door left slightly ajar, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the enduring strength of love. Thomas felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a quiet joy that far surpassed any business triumph he had ever known. He knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time in his life, he was ready for the journey, ready to face whatever came his way, hand in hand with the woman he loved and the beautiful daughter they shared. The foundation of their new life was being laid, not with bricks of ambition and wealth, but with the fragile, yet resilient mortar of redemption and unwavering love. Months turned into a year. Lily was now a bright-eyed toddler, taking her first wobbly steps, filling Amelia's small apartment with infectious laughter. Thomas was still living in Queens, his once thriving business empire now managed by a trusted team, allowing him to dedicate himself fully to Amelia and Lily. He had traded boardrooms for playgrounds, power suits for comfortable jeans, and the relentless pursuit of wealth for the simple joys of fatherhood. Amelia had indeed given him a second chance. They hadn't remarried, but they were living together again, not in the opulent penthouse, but in a larger, cozier home in a family-friendly neighborhood, a space they had chosen together. It was a home filled with love, laughter, and the undeniable presence of their shared past, both good and bad. One sunny afternoon, as Thomas pushed Lily on a swing in a local park, he saw a familiar figure approaching. Sarah. She looked different, less polished, a hint of desperation in her eyes. The ambitious gleam he remembered was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze shifting from Thomas to Lily, then to the happy family portrait they presented. "Thomas," she said, her voice a ghost of its former confidence. He nodded, a polite but distant acknowledgement. "Sarah, I saw you, with your family. You look happy." Her voice was tinged with a bitterness she couldn't quite conceal. "I am," he simply stated, his arm around Amelia's waist as she joined them, a watchful expression on her face. Sarah's gaze flickered to Amelia, a flicker of the old antagonism still present. "Amelia, you look... well, I am," Amelia replied, her voice calm and firm. "Happier than I've ever been." Sarah's shoulders slumped. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, Thomas. For everything. For not telling you about Amelia, for trying to manipulate you. I was so caught up in trying to impress you, to get ahead. I lost myself." Her confession sounded hollow, a desperate attempt at absolution. Thomas looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not a villain, but a lost, misguided woman. He had been so consumed by his own ambition that he had inadvertently fostered the same ruthless drive in those around him. He had been a part of her downfall too, in a way. "Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "I hope you find your path, and I hope you find genuine happiness." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Thank you, Thomas." She turned and walked away, a solitary figure fading into the bustling park, a stark reminder of the person Thomas used to be, and the life he had so narrowly escaped. The encounter was a final test, a moment of closure, a testament to how far Thomas had truly come. He no longer felt anger or resentment towards Sarah, only a quiet understanding. His world, once built on the unstable foundation of power and ambition, was now firmly rooted in love, family, and genuine connection. He looked at Amelia, her hand now intertwined with his. "You know," he said, a smile playing on his lips, "that cashier job actually suited you. You were surprisingly good at it." Amelia laughed, a warm, melodious sound that filled his heart. "And you, Mr. Thorne, are surprisingly good at changing diapers. Who would have thought?" They shared a look, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey, of the trials they had faced, and the love that had emerged, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Lily, sensing the warmth between her parents, clapped her tiny hands, her infectious laughter echoing through the park. Thomas knew their story wasn't a fairy tale, devoid of scars or past hurts. It was a real-life drama, filled with complex emotions, difficult choices, and the arduous, beautiful work of forgiveness and redemption. But standing there, surrounded by the love of his family, he knew he wouldn't trade it for all the riches in the world. He was finally home. Thomas McCown, once a man defined by his wealth and ruthless ambition, had found his true fortune in the most unexpected of places. A supermarket checkout line, a modest apartment, and the unwavering love of his family. His journey from self-serving millionaire to devoted husband and father was a testament to the transformative power of humility, remorse, and the courage to rebuild. He learned that true success isn't measured in bank accounts or company valuations, but in the richness of relationships and the quiet joy of a life well lived. Amelia, with her quiet strength and unwavering integrity, had not only survived betrayal, but had also, through her resilience, guided Thomas towards his own redemption. Their daughter, Lily, was the beacon that illuminated their path, a living symbol of their renewed hope and unwavering commitment. Their story is a powerful reminder that even after the darkest storms, a new dawn can break, bringing with it the promise of a brighter, more meaningful future. It is a story of second chances, of the intricate dance between forgiveness and rebuilding, and the profound truth that love, in its purest form, can heal even the deepest wounds. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life dramas that remind us of the enduring power of the human spirit. He watched her from across the opulent dining room, a predator observing its prey. She was just a waitress, another face in the endless sea of people who served him. But tonight, something was different. Fueled by vintage scotch and the sycophantic laughter of his associates, a cruel idea sparked in his mind. He lifted his hand, beckoning her over. When she stood before his table, he didn't offer a compliment or another order. He pointed a platinum credit card at her, the gesture dripping with condescension, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'll pay you $10,000 to dance for us, right now. Prove you're more than just a tray carrier." The room fell silent. But Rhys Covington had miscalculated. He thought he was buying a moment of humiliation. He had no idea he was about to ignite a fire that would burn his entire world to the ground. Ethelred's was not a restaurant. It was a statement, perched on the 65th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park. Its floor-to-ceiling windows framed a glittering panorama of New York City. The air inside was thick with the scent of money, a blend of expensive perfume-aged leather, and the subtle mouth-watering aroma of truffle oil. The clinking of Christofle silverware against Bernardeau porcelain was the room's delicate heartbeat. For the patrons, it was a sanctuary of power. For the staff, it was a battlefield of quiet servitude. Catalina Petrova knew this battlefield well. For 2 years, it had been her entire world. Each night, she donned the starched, unforgiving black uniform, pulled her cascade of honey-blonde hair into a severe bun, and schooled her face into a mask of polite neutrality. She moved with an economy of motion that bordered on art, her steps silent and swift, her hands steady as she poured a 1982 Chateau Margaux or placed a plate of seared foie gras before men who wouldn't remember her name, let alone her face. Tonight, the prize jewel of Ethelred's clientele was holding court in the corner booth. Rhys Covington. The name was a headline, a brand, a force of nature. At 34, he was the CEO of Covington Global, a tech and private equity behemoth that devoured smaller companies like a shark. He was brutally handsome, with sharp, intelligent eyes, the color of slate, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit, as if it were a second skin, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming discreetly on his wrist. Catalina had served his table 3 times tonight. He hadn't looked at her once. He spoke in a low, confident rumble, his attention fixed on his 2 associates, Oliver Finch, and another man she didn't recognize. They were celebrating a hostile takeover, their laughter sharp and triumphant. Catalina refilled their water glasses, her presence as significant as a gust of air from the climate control system. The board folded like a cheap suit, Rhys was saying, a smirk playing on his lips. They talked about company culture and loyalty. Pathetic. Every person has a price, Oliver. You just have to find it." Oliver Finch, a man with a kinder face and weary eyes, shifted in his seat. "Perhaps some things aren't for sale, Reese." Reese let out a short, derisive laugh. "Name one." It was then that his gaze, sweeping the room with bored ownership, finally landed on Catalina as she cleared a nearby table. He watched her for a moment, his eyes narrowing. He saw the ramrod straight posture, the controlled grace in the way she bent to lift a heavy tray. To his cynical mind, it registered not as dignity, but as practiced subservience. A cruel, alcohol-fueled idea took root. He wanted to prove his point to Oliver, to the world. He lifted a manicured hand, a gesture both lazy and commanding. "Waitress." Catalina's heart gave a little jump. Being singled out by a table like this was never good. She approached, her hands clasped behind her back. "Yes, sir." Reese didn't invite her closer. He made her stand at the edge of the booth, a supplicant. He leaned forward, his voice a low drawl that carried in the suddenly quieted atmosphere. He pulled out his wallet, a sleek piece of black alligator leather, and extracted a platinum card. He didn't offer it to her. He pointed it at her like a weapon. "I have a proposition for you," he began, the smirk returning. His associates stilled, watching the unfolding spectacle. "My associate here believes some people possess a dignity that can't be bought. I disagree. I say everyone has a price." He tapped the card on the table. "I'll pay you $10,000, right here, right now. All you have to do is dance for us." Or a collective muffled gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Catalina felt a hot flush creep up her neck. This wasn't a request. It was a public dissection. He wanted to see her squirm, to see her grapple with her need versus her pride, and then inevitably capitulate. He wanted to prove that she, like the company he'd just acquired, was just another asset to be bought and controlled. "Sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You heard me," he said louder now, enjoying the attention. "Clear a little space. Dance. Any kind of dance. Entertain us. $10,000 for 5 minutes of your time. What do you say? Is your dignity worth more than that?" Her manager, Mr. Henderson, was already moving towards them, his face a mask of panicked apology. This was a catastrophic breach of decorum. But Reese Covington was not a man you interrupted. Catalina looked at Reese's face. She saw the cold amusement in his eyes, the utter certainty that he had her pinned. He saw a waitress in a cheap uniform. He saw rent bills, student loans. He saw desperation. And he was right. She was desperate. But not for the reasons he imagined. She didn't think of her tiny shared apartment in Queens or her mountain of debt. She thought of her brother Nico. She thought of the sterile white walls of the hospital room, the quiet beep of the machines, the specialist's grave face as he discussed experimental treatments for systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis treatments, not covered by any insurance. $10,000 wasn't rent money. It was a single dose of medication. It was 2 months of physical therapy. It was a sliver of hope. Her pride, the shield she had carried for years, felt paper thin. It was a luxury she couldn't afford. But surrender wasn't in her nature. A different kind of fire, one she had suppressed for so long it had nearly turned to ash, began to glow in her chest. She met his gaze, and for the first time her own eyes were not neutral. They were clear, direct, and held a depth of emotion that startled him. She gave a single sharp nod. "Fine." The word hung in the air, electric. But not here, she added, her voice suddenly clear and steady. She gestured to the small empty space near the grand piano, where the pianist had just finished his set. There, and I'll need you to pay up front. Reese's smirk widened into a triumphant grin. He had won. He gestured to the waiter's station, and within a minute, a portable credit card machine was on the table. He swiped his card, punched in the numbers, without looking, and a receipt for 10,000 spooled out. He tore it off and held it out to her. "Your winnings," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Catalina took the slip of paper. Her hand did not shake. She folded it once and tucked it securely into her apron pocket. Then she turned her back on him and walked toward the piano. She began to unpin her hair. The severe bun unraveled, and a cascade of honey-blonde waves tumbled down her back, catching the light of the chandeliers. She kicked off her sensible black work shoes, her bare feet making soft contact with the polished marble floor. The room was utterly silent. Every diner, every waiter, every busboy was frozen watching. Reese Covington leaned back in his booth, crossing his arms. He was ready for the show. He expected a clumsy, awkward shuffle, a cringe-worthy attempt at seduction. He was about to get the shock of his life. Catalina stood in the small circle of light by the grand piano. The city lights of Manhattan blazed behind her, a silent, glittering audience. She closed her eyes for a single, centering breath. In that moment, she was no longer Catalina Petrova, the waitress. The starched uniform felt like a costume, and the opulent restaurant faded away, replaced by the scent of rosin and worn wooden floors of a studio she hadn't seen in 5 years. She could hear the voice of her old ballet master, Mikhail, a stern Russian émigré who saw the fire in her soul. "Do not dance the steps, Catalina," he would say, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Dance the story. Let it bleed from you." She opened her eyes. The story tonight was one of fury and grief. She began without music. The first movement was slow, almost hesitant. She raised her arms not in a graceful arc, but as if pushing against an immense weight. Her fingers trembled, then curled into fists. Her body contracted a silent scream of frustration that was so palpable, a woman at a nearby table put a hand to her own throat. Reese Covington's smirk faltered. This wasn't the awkward flailing he'd anticipated. This was something else. This was control. Every muscle in her body was taut, deliberate. Then she moved. It started in her feet. A complex, percussive rhythm tapped out on the marble, a staccato beat of anger. Her body followed, erupting from its coiled tension. She launched into a series of movements that were a breathtaking, impossible fusion of classical ballet and raw, contemporary expression. There was the perfect line of an arabesque, held for a heart-stopping second, immediately shattered by a guttural, angular contraction of her torso. She spun a flurry of fouette turns, executed with a precision that would have been applauded at the Lincoln Center, but they weren't clean and pretty. They were dizzying, desperate, as if she were trying to outrun a demon. The diners were mesmerized. Phones were forgotten. Conversations died. The only sound was the whisper of her bare feet on the floor and her own ragged breathing. Oliver Finch leaned toward Reese, his voice a stunned whisper. "Reese, who is she?" Reese didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on her. He, a man who curated his life with priceless art, who could distinguish a Monet from a Manet, at 20 paces recognized the language she was speaking. It was the language of true artistry, of a talent so profound it was almost violent. He felt a strange, unsettling feeling in his chest, the feeling of being utterly, catastrophically wrong. Catalina was lost in the dance. It was a torrent of everything she had suppressed for 5 years. The grief for her parents lost in a car crash that had also shattered her brother's body. The rage at the universe for stealing her dream, forcing her to trade her point shoes for a serving tray. The fierce, desperate love for Nico that fueled every grueling shift, every sacrifice. She danced the pain of watching her own muscles atrophy while her brother fought to regain the use of his. She danced the humiliation of begging doctors for payment plans. She danced the despair of lonely nights, wondering if this was all her life would ever be. Her movements were sharp, precise, filled with a sorrow that was achingly beautiful. A grand jeté was not a leap of joy, but a frantic, desperate reach for something just out of grasp. Her arms, which had carried trays of champagne, now carved through the air, telling a story of loss and resilience. For the finale, she slowed. She sank to the floor, her body folding in on itself until she was a crumpled heap on the marble. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. It wasn't acting. In that moment, the weight of it all came crashing down. Then slowly, painfully, she rose. One vertebra at a time, she unfurled her head, the last thing to lift. She stood tall, her back ramrod straight once more. Her face was tear-streaked, but her eyes blazed with defiance. It was a declaration. "You have not broken me." She held the final pose, chest heaving, her gaze sweeping over the stunned room until it landed directly on Rhys Covington. The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched for 10-15 seconds. It was broken by a single person. Oliver Finch, his face etched with awe, began to clap. Hesitantly at first, then with conviction. He rose to his feet. One by one, others joined him. The quiet applause grew into a thunderous, sustained, standing ovation. The patrons of Ethelred's billionaires and socialites were on their feet applauding a waitress. Rhys remained seated frozen. The applause was like white noise in his ears. He felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. He had intended to buy a spectacle of humiliation. Instead, he had paid to witness a masterpiece of raw, untamed genius. He had treated a Stradivarius like a cheap fiddle. The arrogance drained out of him, replaced by a cold, hollow shame. Catalina ignored the applause. Her eyes, still locked on Rhys, were filled with a cold, righteous fury. She held his gaze for a long moment, letting him see the full extent of his misjudgment. Then she turned, walked calmly to where she had left her shoes, and slipped them on. She wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand, a gesture of such raw humanity, it made Rhys flinch. Without a word to anyone, without even a glance at her furious yet dumbfounded manager, she walked straight past the maitre d', through the heavy glass doors of Ethelred's, and out into the hallway, leaving a room full of applause and one utterly shattered billionaire in her wake. The receipt for $10,000 was still tucked in her apron. She hadn't earned it. She had taken it as compensation for damages. The next morning, Rhys Covington woke to a world that was subtly, yet irrevocably altered. Usually, his mornings were a seamless ritual of efficiency, a 5 a.m. workout with his personal trainer, a glance at the pre-market reports from Asia, and a breakfast of black coffee and dry toast, while his personal assistant, a ruthlessly competent woman named Missoul, Davies, briefed him on the day's schedule. But today he couldn't focus. The image of the waitress Catalina, he'd learned her name was from a panicked Mr. Henderson, was seared into his mind. Her dance played on a loop behind his eyes, the fury, the grace, the profound, gut-wrenching sorrow. It had been more honest and real than anything he had experienced in years. His world was one of contracts, algorithms, and calculated risks. It was a world of surfaces of polite lies and brutal truths hidden behind spreadsheets. Last night, she had ripped all of that away and shown him something elemental, and he had tried to buy it for $10,000. The thought made his stomach churn with a feeling he wasn't accustomed to self-loathing. "Sir," Ms. Davies said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "The board meeting for the Sterling acquisition is at 9. You have a preliminary call with the legal team in 20 minutes. Cancel it," Reese said, his voice flat. "Miss Dawes." Davies blinked. Reese Covington did not cancel. "Sir." "You heard me. Cancel the morning, all of it." He stood up, pacing his minimalist penthouse apartment, the city sprawling beneath him. "I have a new priority. I want you to find someone for me." "Of course, Mr. Covington." "Name?" "Catalina Petrova. She was a waitress at Ethelred's. As of last night, I believe she is formally employed." "Understood. Shall I have a non-disclosure agreement drafted, a severance package?" Ms. Davies assumed he was doing damage control, paying for silence. "No," Reese said sharply. "No agreements, no money. I want to know who she is. Everything. Employment history, education, family. Everything. Use whatever resources you need. Private investigators, data, analysts, I don't care. Be discreet." "Yes, sir," she said, her professional mask hiding her surprise. For the rest of the day, Reese was a ghost in his own life. He sat in his office, the chrome and glass reflecting a man he barely recognized. He stared at a priceless Jackson Pollock on his wall, a chaotic masterpiece of drips and splatters, and for the first time, it looked like a cheap imitation of the emotion Catalina had painted in the air with her body. Meanwhile, the story had already begun to leak. Not from the patrons, their circle was too small and too concerned with appearances, but from the staff. By noon, a grainy cell phone video shot by a busboy hiding behind a service station had surfaced online. It was titled "Billionaire Dares Waitress to Dance. You won't believe what happens next." The video went viral. By mid-afternoon, it had 1 million views. By evening, 10 million. News outlets picked it up. #Waitress Dance was trending. The internet, with its insatiable appetite for David and Goliath stories, had found its new heroine. They called her the Angel of Ethelred's, the firebird in an apron. Speculation was rampant. Was she a Juilliard dropout, a former Broadway star, a Russian ballerina who had fled her past? For Catalina, the viral fame was a terrifying, suffocating nightmare. She had gone straight from the restaurant to her brother's bedside at the hospital, sitting with him until the morning nurses arrived. When she finally got back to her cramped apartment, her roommate Jenna was waiting. Her eyes wide, holding up her phone. "Cat, you need to see this," Jenna said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. Catalina watched the blurry video, her stomach twisting into a knot. She saw herself a stranger on a screen, her face contorted in a mask of pain and fury. The comments were a blur of praise and pity. They saw her as an inspiration. She just felt exposed, violated. The one thing that had been truly hers, her dance, her story, was now a piece of public consumption, just as Reese Covington had intended. "I have to disappear," Catalina said, her voice shaking. She unplugged her Wi-Fi router and turned off her phone. "He can't find me." "Who the billionaire?" Jenna asked. "Cat, what he did was monstrous, but look at this. People are offering you scholarships contracts." A scout from the American Ballet Theatre left a comment. "It's charity, Jenna. It's pity because some rich monster threw money at a poor girl. That's not how I want to go back. It's not about the art anymore. It's about the spectacle. She paced their small living room, feeling like a cornered animal. The $10,000, which she had already transferred to the hospital's billing department, felt like dirty money. It was the price of her privacy. The next 2 days were a siege. Reporters began showing up at her apartment building. She had to sneak out the back to visit Nico. At the hospital, she wore a hoodie and sunglasses, her head down, praying no one would recognize her. The newfound attention was a spotlight, but it felt less like a stage light and more like the beam of a prison watchtower. On the 3rd day, Ms. Davies walked into Reese's office and placed a slim file on his desk. "Catalina Petrova," she announced. Reese opened it, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar anxiety. The report was concise, compiled by the best investigators his money could buy. It was a life story, condensed into bullet points. Catalina Petrova, age 24. Parents Andrei and Elena Petrova. Former principal dancers with the Kyiv City Ballet. Immigrated to the US in 1999. Deceased. Motor vehicle accident. 5 years ago. Education admitted to the Joffrey Ballet School on a full scholarship at age 16. Considered a prodigy. Dropped out at age 19. Reason for withdrawal. The same accident that killed her parents left her younger brother, Nico Petrova, age 14 at the time, with severe lifelong injuries, became his legal guardian. Sibling Nico Petrova, age 19, currently admitted to St. Damian's Hospital for Children. Diagnosis: systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis, severe and aggressive form. Multiple surgeries, requires ongoing expensive experimental biologic therapy. Employment history. A string of menial jobs for 5 years. Waitress, barista, coat, check, girl. All cash-based where possible to avoid wage garnishment from medical debt. Financials. In excess of $400,000 in medical debt. No significant assets. Reese read the report 3 times. The cold, hard facts painted a picture far more devastating than any dance. A prodigy who had sacrificed her entire future for her brother. She wasn't dancing for pride or for his dirty money. She was dancing for a life, for her brother's life. The shame he had felt before was nothing compared to the wave of revulsion that washed over him now. He hadn't just been arrogant, he had been cruel. He had taken a woman's unimaginable pain and turned it into a floor show for his own amusement. He closed the file. His usual decisiveness. His killer instinct was gone. He didn't know what to do. Sending money would be an insult, a confirmation of her worst fears about him. An apology felt laughably inadequate, but doing nothing was impossible. "Cancel the rest of my week," he said to Ms. Davies, his voice hoarse, "and get me everything there is to know about St. Damian's Hospital and this experimental therapy." He was no longer just searching for a woman. He was searching for a way to reckon with the man he had become. Finding Catalina's apartment was easy for a man with Reese's resources. Approaching it was one of the hardest things he had ever done. He swapped his tailored suit for dark jeans and a simple grey cashmere sweater, trying to appear less like a corporate raider and more like a human being. He drove himself, leaving his chauffeur and his Bentley behind, and parked his unremarkable black Audi down the street from her walk-up in Astoria, Queens. The building was old. The brick facade weathered the fire escapes, zigzagging across its face like iron scars. It was a different universe from his glass tower on Park Avenue. He stood on the sidewalk for a full 10 minutes, watching people come and go, trying to find the right words. There were none. He finally buzzed her apartment 4B. There was no answer. He tried again. Nothing. Just as he was about to give up, the main door opened, and a young woman with bright pink hair and a nose ring came out. It was Jenna on her way to work. She recognized him instantly from the news, and her eyes widened in a mixture of fear and hostility. "You," she breathed, planting her feet firmly in the doorway. "You have a lot of nerve coming here." "I need to speak with her," Reese said, his voice quiet. "Please, it's important. So you can throw more money at her. Humiliate her some more." Jenna shot back, her voice dripping with protective venom. "She's not here, and if she was, she wouldn't want to see you. You turned her life into a circus. Reporters are camped out down the block. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Reese had the grace to look ashamed. "I know, I made a mistake. A terrible one. I need to apologize." "An apology isn't going to fix this," Jenna said, but his visible contrition had softened her stance slightly. She sighed a puff of frustrated air. "Look, she's not here. She's probably at the hospital, St. Damian's, with her brother. Now please just leave her alone." She pushed past him and hurried down the street. Reese stood there for a moment, the name of the hospital echoing in his head. It confirmed the file. He got back in his car, his resolve hardening. He wouldn't ambush her at a hospital. That was a sacred space. But he knew where she had to come back to. He would wait. Hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Reese sat in his car watching apartment 4B's window. He conducted $1 billion business from his phone, his texts and emails as sharp and decisive as ever, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about sacrifice, about a talent so bright being extinguished by circumstance. His own life had been a seamless ascent, paved with inherited wealth and sharp-edged ambition. He'd never had to sacrifice anything. Finally, just after 9 p.m., he saw her. She was walking down the street, a small, solitary figure wrapped in an oversized coat. Her hair was hidden under a beanie, her face pale and drawn in the glow of the streetlights. She moved with a weary tension, her eyes scanning the street for reporters. Reese got out of the car. She saw him immediately and froze like a deer caught in headlights. Her hand flew to her coat pocket, clutching her keys like a weapon. Every ounce of exhaustion in her body was instantly replaced by rigid hostility. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold and flat. "Miss Petrova, Catalina." He began, taking a cautious step forward. She took a step back. "I came to apologize." "You came to my home," she corrected him, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "You had me investigated. Don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else." Reese stopped. "Yes, I did. I needed to understand." "Understand what?" She shot back, her voice rising. "That people like me aren't props for your amusement. That our lives are more than a line item on a balance sheet." "Did your investigators tell you that Mr. Covington—" "They told me you were a prodigy," he said softly. "They told me what you gave up for your brother." The mention of her brother made her flinch, as if he'd struck her. "You will not speak about my brother. You have no right." "I know," he said, and the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. "What I did, it was inexcusable. It was arrogant and cruel, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. The world sees the video, the dance. They don't see the context. I do. And I am profoundly sorry. Catalina stared at him, her chest tight. She had expected blustering excuses, another offer of money. She had not expected this quiet, soul-deep shame. It disarmed her. But the anger was still there, a shield against the man who had laid her soul bare for the world to see. "Your apology doesn't make the reporters go away," she said, her voice brittle. "It doesn't give me back my privacy. It doesn't change the fact that people now look at me with pity." "I want to help," Reese said, stumbling back into his default mode. "The foundation I run, we could create a grant, a full scholarship to any dance conservatory you choose. We can cover all of Nico's medical expenses, all of them. Just name your price. I'll make this right." It was the worst possible thing he could have said. Catalina's face, which had softened for a moment, hardened into marble. A bitter, mirthless laugh escaped her lips. "Name my price." She repeated the words, dripping with scorn. "You still don't get it. You still think this is a transaction. You think you can throw your money at this ugly thing you created and wash it all away. My life, my brother's health, my talent. It's not for sale, Mr. Covington. It never was." She took a deep breath, her eyes glittering with unshed tears of pure fury. "The $10,000 you paid me, I gave it to the hospital. It bought Nico 2 weeks. That is the only transaction you and I will ever have. Thank you for that. And now I want you to leave. And I never, ever want to see you again." She turned on her heel and walked to her building, fumbling with her keys. She didn't look back. Reese stood on the sidewalk, the cold night air biting at his skin. He felt as though she had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. "It's not for sale." The words echoed in his mind, a final damning judgment. He had come here to fix a problem the way he always did, with money, power, and influence. And he had failed, spectacularly. He had thought the dance was her story. He was wrong. The dance was just the prologue. Her real story was one of integrity. And he had just discovered that it was the one currency he didn't possess and couldn't buy. As he walked back to his car, he knew that a simple apology and a blank check wouldn't be enough. To make this right, he would have to change the very rules of the game he thought he had mastered. Reese Covington did not become a billionaire by accepting defeat. Catalina's rejection, as cutting and absolute as it was, didn't deter him. It redefined the objective. The problem wasn't a financial one to be solved, but a moral one to be reconciled. He returned to his world of glass and steel, not with a sense of failure, but with a new singular purpose. His first call was not to his lawyers or bankers, but to Dr. Anjali Sharma, the head of pediatric rheumatology at St. Damian's Hospital. He made the call himself, bypassing Ms. Davies. He introduced himself, and after a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, he got straight to the point. "I've been made aware of your work with experimental biologic therapies for SJIA." Reese stated, his tone devoid of its usual arrogance, replaced by a focused intensity. "Specifically, for a patient named Nico Petrova." Dr. Sharma was cautious. "Patient information is confidential, Mr. Covington." "I'm not asking for information. I'm offering to provide fundings," Reese clarified. "I want to underwrite the entire research program. New equipment, more staff, full funding for clinical trials for the next 5 years. And I want to create a patient access fund to cover the costs for any family that cannot afford treatment, starting with the Petrovas. Anonymously. My name is not to be associated with it in any way. A corporate donation from a Covington Global subsidiary. That's it." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Dr. Sharma, who spent half her time fighting for grants and begging for donations, was speechless. The sum Reese was proposing was enough to change the lives of hundreds of children. "Mr. Covington, I don't know what to say. This would be transformative." "Just say you'll accept it," Reese said, "and that Nico Petrova will receive the best care on the planet, cost being no object, effective immediately." "Yes," Dr. Sharma breathed. "Of course, yes." That was the first piece, the easy piece. The second was more complex. Catalina had rejected his money because it was a handout, a transactional apology. He needed to create an opportunity, not charity. He needed to build a stage, not a gilded cage. He spent the next week in a whirlwind of activity. He leveraged his network not for financial gain, but for artistic consultation. He met with the directors of the American Ballet Theatre, the board of the Juilliard School, and choreographers whose names were legends. He wasn't buying talent. He was learning about the world that had been stolen from Catalina. He learned about the brutal toll that dance takes on the body, the short careers, the constant threat of injury that could end a dream in an instant. He learned about the thousands of talented young artists who were one medical bill, one family crisis away from giving it all up. An idea began to form, grand and audacious. It wasn't about one dancer. It was about all of them. Oliver Finch found him late one night in the office, surrounded by blueprints and proposals, not for a skyscraper, but for a different kind of structure. "I thought you'd be halfway to Tokyo for the Nakatomi deal," Oliver said, loosening his tie. "Postponed it," Reese replied, not looking up from a document. "Look at this." He slid a proposal across the vast mahogany desk. The title read, "The Phoenix Initiative." Oliver read it, his eyebrows climbing higher with each page. It was a proposal for a new foundation, endowed with a staggering $100 million of Reese's personal fortune. Its mission was twofold. First, to provide full financial and medical support for promising young dancers and performing artists whose careers were threatened by injury or personal crisis. Second, to build a state-of-the-art performance and rehabilitation center, a place where art and healing could coexist. "My God, Reese," Oliver whispered. This is incredible. What brought this on?" "You said some things aren't for sale," Reese said, finally looking up. His eyes were tired but clear, filled with a resolve Oliver hadn't seen before. "You were right, but that doesn't mean they can't be supported, nurtured. This isn't charity. It's an investment in human potential." He was building a world where someone like Catalina wouldn't have to choose between her brother's life and her own. While Reese was building his quiet revolution, Catalina was fighting a war of attrition. A few days after their encounter, she received a call from Dr. Sharma. "Catalina, I have some wonderful news," the doctor said, her voice buoyant with a joy Catalina hadn't heard in years. "A new corporate grant has just come through. It's specifically for our SJIA research and patient support. The long and short of it is this: Nico's entire treatment plan from today until he is in full remission is completely covered. All of it." Catalina sank into a chair. The phone pressed hard against her ear. She was crying silent tears of overwhelming relief rolling down her cheeks. For 5 years she had been carrying a mountain on her back, and in a single phone call it had vanished. She didn't question where it came from. In a city of immense wealth, anonymous corporate philanthropy wasn't unheard of. She accepted it as a miracle, a long overdue moment of grace from a universe that had been relentlessly cruel. The weight of financial desperation lifted, but the weight of her squandered talent remained. The viral video had died down, but its ghost lingered. She'd had offers, of course, from dance companies and choreographers, but they all felt tainted by the spectacle. They saw the story, not the artist. She ignored them all. But something had shifted in her. With Nico's future secure, a tiny, fragile seed of her own future began to germinate in the barren soil of her life. She started waking up at 5 a.m. before Jenna was awake and clearing the small space in their living room. She would stretch, feeling the familiar pull and ache in muscles long dormant. She moved through the classical positions, her body remembering the language her mind had tried to forget. It was clumsy at first. Her balance was off, her endurance gone. But the muscle memory was there, buried deep. Each day, she reclaimed a small piece of herself. One afternoon, a new player entered the game. Reese was in a meeting reviewing the shortlist for the Phoenix Initiative's executive director when his phone buzzed. It was a name from the file he'd had compiled on Catalina. Bianca Dubois. Bianca had been Catalina's chief rival at the Joffrey School. The report had described her as intensely competitive and noted several instances of professional jealousy. She was now a rising soloist with a prestigious contemporary dance company in New York. Reese, in his deep dive, had seen her name on the program for an upcoming gala at the Lincoln Center, a gala he was now a primary sponsor of. He took the call. "Mr. Covington." Bianca's voice was smooth as silk laced with ambition. "I heard about your incredible new initiative. I think it's simply visionary. I was a contemporary of Catalina Petrova at Joffrey, you know." "I'm aware," Reese said, his voice neutral. "She was always dramatic," Bianca continued, a subtle barb in her tone. "Such a shame what happened. But seeing that video, it brought it all back. I'm performing at the Lincoln Center Gala next month, the one you're sponsoring. I was hoping we could meet. Perhaps I could offer some insight for your foundation." From one artist to another. Reese felt a cold prickle of unease. He recognized her type immediately. She was an opportunist cloaked in the guise of an artist. She saw his money and influence as a ladder. But she was also a direct link to Catalina's past. "I'll be at the gala," Reese said, his voice clipped. "We can speak then." He hung up, a sense of foreboding settling over him. He was building an arc for artists like Catalina. But he knew that for every true talent, there were sharks like Bianca Dubois, circling in the water drawn by the scent of money and opportunity. And she was on a collision course with the very person he was trying to save. The Lincoln Center Fall Gala was the glittering apex of the New York arts and society calendar. Reese Covington, usually a reluctant attendee at such events, was now its lead sponsor. His involvement wasn't just a name on a program. The Phoenix Initiative was being officially announced that night. It was the public unveiling of his penance. He walked through the grand lobby, a man transformed. He still wore an impeccably tailored tuxedo, but the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful gravity. He was greeted by fawning board members and socialites, but his eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a face he knew wasn't there. He had sent a personal invitation to Catalina, delivered by a professional courier. It was simple, respectful, with a handwritten note. "This is not charity. This is a stage. It's waiting for you if you ever want it. No strings attached." She hadn't replied. He hadn't expected her to. He found Oliver by the champagne bar. "Any sign?" Reese asked. Oliver shook his head. "I didn't think she'd come, Reese. It's too much too soon. But what you've built, it's magnificent. You should be proud." It's just a building and a bank account until it helps someone, Reese replied, his gaze distant. His conversation was interrupted by a voice like honey laced with ice. "Mr. Covington, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." He turned to see Bianca Dubois. She was stunning, her dancer's physique draped in a backless emerald green gown. Her smile was wet and brilliant, but it didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Ms. Dubois," Reese said, his voice coolly polite, "I'm looking forward to your performance. I do hope it lives up to the raw emotion we've all seen recently." She said, the barb aimed squarely at Catalina. "It's amazing what goes viral these days. Some of us spend decades perfecting our craft. Others just need a moment of public desperation." Reese's jaw tightened. "Talent is talent, Ms. Dubois. The public has a way of recognizing the real thing." Bianca's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She quickly recovered. "Of course, it's just... I knew Kat. I know her story. I worry she's being taken advantage of. Her emotional state is so fragile. It would be a tragedy if her little moment of fame ended up hurting her more." It was a masterful performance of feigned concern designed to plant seeds of doubt. Reese saw right through it. This woman wasn't worried about Catalina. She was terrified of her. Terrified that the raw, untrained genius of her old rival could eclipse her own polished technical skill. "I appreciate your concern," Reese said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to speak with the director." He turned and walked away, leaving Bianca fuming behind her perfect smile. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric with controlled chaos. Dancers stretched, stagehands scurried, and the air hummed with nervous energy. Bianca stood in the wings waiting for her cue. Her piece was the highlight of the second act. But her mind wasn't on her choreography. It was on Reese Covington's dismissive tone, on the whispers about the Phoenix Initiative, on the ghost of Catalina Petrova, that seemed to haunt this entire evening. She had spent 5 years clawing her way to the top, relishing the fact that her greatest rival had vanished. Now that rival was the most talked about dancer in the world, all because of one clumsy, emotional outburst in a restaurant. The injustice of it burned in her gut. Just then her phone buzzed. It was a text from a journalist she kept on a short leash, a gossip columnist at a tabloid. "Anything on the mystery waitress?" The buzz is she's here tonight. An idea venomous and brilliant sparked in Bianca's mind. She typed a quick reply. "Source says Covington brought her, making a scene, trying to leverage her 15 minutes of fame. She's emotionally unstable. He's taking advantage. It was a lie, but a plausible one. It painted Reese as a predator and Catalina as a pathetic, unstable victim. It cheapened her talent, reducing it to a side effect of a breakdown. It was perfect." She hit send, a cruel smile gracing her lips. The story would be online before her performance was even over. Meanwhile, across town, Catalina was not at the gala. She was in a small rented dance studio in Brooklyn, the kind with scuffed floors and mirrors that had seen better days. It was the first time she had set foot in a proper studio in 5 years. The $100 for a 2-hour rental felt like an indulgence, but one her soul desperately needed. She wore old leggings and a faded t-shirt. Her body ached, but it was a good ache. The music from her phone's small speaker filled the room. It wasn't a grand symphony, but a simple melancholic piece for cello. And she danced. She wasn't dancing for an audience or for a billionaire's dare. She was dancing for herself. She was rediscovering her own lines, testing her strength, finding her balance. The movements weren't filled with the raw rage of that night at Ethelred's. They were quieter, more questioning. It was a dance of healing, of piecing together the broken parts of herself. Reese's invitation was on the bench next to her water bottle. She had read his handwritten note 100 times. A stage. It's waiting for you. A part of her was tempted, but a bigger part was terrified. She wasn't ready to step into his world, a world that included people like Bianca Dubois. She remembered Bianca's casual cruelty, her accidental trips in the hallway, the whispers she would start in the dressing room. As she finished a combination, she checked her phone for the time. A news alert popped up on her screen. The headline made her blood run cold. Billionaire sponsor Reese Covington attempts to push waitress dancer into spotlight at Lincoln Center Gala. Sources claim Petrova is unstable and being manipulated. The article was short, vicious, and filled with anonymous quotes painting her as a pathetic mess and Reese as a manipulative puppet master. It mentioned Bianca Dubois as a concerned contemporary who worried for Catalina's well-being. Catalina sank to the floor, the phone slipping from her hand. It was happening all over again. Her story, her life was being twisted and sold by others. But this time, it was worse. They were using her to attack Reese, the one person who in his own clumsy way was trying to atone. And Bianca, her old nemesis, was pulling the strings. The old fire, the one she thought she was learning to control, roared back to life in her chest. They thought she was unstable. A victim. A pawn. She stood up, her body trembling not with weakness, but with a surge of pure adrenaline. Her quiet dance of healing was over. She grabbed her bag, her coat, and Reese's invitation. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to let them write her story for her. Bianca Dubois wanted a ghost. She was about to get one. Catalina Petrova was going to the gala. Catalina was in a small rented Brooklyn studio when the world intruded. In a moment of rest, wiping sweat from her brow, she glanced at her phone. A news alert lit up the screen. The headline, "A poisoned dart, billionaire sponsor, Reese Covington, attempts to push waitress dancer into spotlight." Sources claim Petrova is unstable and being manipulated. The article was riddled with quotes from a concerned contemporary, Bianca Dubois. The words unstable and manipulated struck Catalina like a physical blow. Bianca's venom reached across the years, attempting to poison her comeback, twisting her art into a symptom of a breakdown. The quiet healing dance she had been practicing died in her heart, replaced by a clarifying, cold rage. They thought she was a pawn. A victim. She grabbed her coat and Reese's crumpled invitation. She wasn't going to hide from their lies. She was going to burn them down with the truth. She arrived at the Lincoln Center like a force of nature, her street clothes a stark rebellion against the finery of the gala. The name Catalina Petrova was all she needed to get past security and be rushed backstage, where she found Reese in the midst of a crisis meeting. He looked up, and the shock on his face was quickly replaced by awe. "I saw the article," she said, her voice devoid of fear. "It's a lie. You offered me a stage. I'm here to use it." This was not the desperate woman from his restaurant. This was a warrior. Reese looked past her to the bewildered stage manager. "The program has changed," he commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "She's on, now." In the wings, Bianca Dubois froze as the announcer's voice echoed through the theater, introducing a special performance from the Phoenix Initiative. Her name was not called. Catalina's was. The curtain rose on a bare stage. Catalina stood center, bathed in a single spotlight. The audience murmured, recognizing the figure from the viral video. But the dance she performed was not the one they expected. Gone was the raw grief and fury. In its place was breathtaking control power and precision. Every movement was a direct, elegant refutation of Bianca's slander. An arabesque held with impossible strength declared her stability. A series of flawless, powerful turns mocked the idea she could be manipulated. She was not dancing her pain. She was demonstrating her mastery. She ended not in a crumpled heap of sorrow, but in a pose of unshakable strength. Chin lifted her gaze, sweeping across the theater. The silence that followed was heavy with shock before the entire building erupted in a tidal wave of applause. It was a standing ovation, not of pity, but of profound respect for a true artist. As she walked off stage, she passed Bianca, who stood ashen-faced, a ghost at a feast. Catalina didn't even look at her. Her victory was so complete, her rival was no longer relevant. She found Reese waiting in the shadows. The vast, complicated space between them, filled with money, shame, and power, had finally vanished. All that was left was two people who had seen each other's true character. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the stage." "Thank you," he replied, his voice filled with an emotion she now understood was respect. "For showing them all who you are." He didn't offer her a contract or a check. He offered her something more. The Phoenix Initiative needs an artistic director. Someone who understands what it means to fight. Someone who can build a stage for others. He held out his hand. It wasn't an offer of charity, but of partnership. She looked at his hand, then into his eyes, and saw not a billionaire, but a man who had finally learned the value of things that can't be bought. She placed her hand in his. A new dance was just beginning. The story of Catalina Petrova and Reese Covington isn't just about a dance. It's a powerful reminder that there is a story behind every face we see, a hidden talent waiting in the most unexpected places. It shows us that true strength isn't about the money in your bank account, but the fear in your soul. Catalina's journey teaches us that even when the world tries to write your story for you, you always have the power to step onto the stage and dance your own truth. It's a testament to second chances, the humbling power of empathy, and the fact that it's never too late to right a wrong. If this story of resilience and redemption moved you, please help us share it with the world. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that challenge our perspectives. What part of Catalina's journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.